Wonderful to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. And I want to begin our journey into your work by exploring, we're on the 4-year anniversary of this pandemic. Let's go back to 2020. How did you get through it and how did it change you?
It's a great question. So I started my business in December of 2019, which
Wow.
is a great time to start it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Huh? Uh, and I think in some ways it actually was helpful because I hadn't had this established practice set up that I think a lot of people struggled with because things were working a specific way for them and all of a sudden stopped working. Like I was in that phase of I don't know what's working and I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall constantly and I just continued to do that.
Yeah.
I For the business side of things, I had contracts lined up that I lost as soon as the pandemic shut everything down. And so what had been looking like a decent spring and summer turned into a lot of unknowns, but it wasn't as though I had any normalcy that I was expecting because it was the beginning of a business and beginning of
Yeah.
businesses are always chaotic. So I just really hustled, right? Like I just really spent time reaching out to people, I was doing webinars at the time. And at the time, I think everyone was just so overwhelmed and anxious that they kind of put themselves into anything and everything, whether that was baking or watching me talk about presentations online. And so that actually helped a lot because people were trying to find outlets in which they could kind of separate themselves from the angst that they were feeling. And so that was a way that I felt like I was able to grow my business. And obviously, internally, there was a lot more unknowns and angst happening because of the pandemic and because of the new business that was starting. But I think I actually I found that the year after, so 2021 was harder for me because 2020, I was able to do these webinars, things were working, I was getting business from it. And then 2021, everyone started to just they were just overloaded. They were
Yeah.
overwhelmed. Everyone's burnt out. They were sick of being on Zoom calls. And so what I had been doing for the past year wasn't working anymore. And so I kind of had a little bit of a delayed issue with the COVID crisis happening in terms of business wise because I then had a kind of normal set of expectations that then got violated when people started to become burned out. And then you had to pivot again, right? And it's all just about being nimble and adapting and continuing to throw spaghetti. I think that's ultimately what I learned from the past 4 years is that you're never, even when you think you have something figured out, you should always be continuing to try new things and be open to exploration.
So let me ask you this. On paper, there's a lot going on. You're a coach, graphic designer, speaker, educator, um, TEDx speaker, coach, visual storyteller. But if I was to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day and one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer that child?
I help people tell their stories.
Okay.
So whether that's through graphic design and I help you visually tell it or through presentations and I help you verbally tell it, it's all the same thing, right? You have a message and you are trying to tell the world in some way and I'm helping you craft that into a message, whether visually or verbally, that resonates with the audience. So that would be
That
how
makes
I would.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that would make sense to them. So when you were in that position in the third grade, what did you want to be? What was your dream to grow up?
You know, I don't think anything ever stuck long enough. I was pretty unsure as to what I wanted to do, which was even evident up until, I entered college, I think. I was just really unsure. I think there was a period of time where I really wanted to be a zoologist and
Mhm.
feed animals in the zoo. I felt like being an astronaut was fun, like all those
Yeah.
things that kids just you go with whatever your passion is. I really always liked drawing, and so when I got to high school, I kind of delved a little bit deeper into that, and that had me. That kind of what started the graphic design journey is that I had liked art, and so that kind of was my segue into it.
And then the storytelling aspect, how did all of those seeds kind of get in there to become who you are?
don't know. That's a great question. I so when I was in college, I studied graphic design and psychology, and I found the psychology aspect of it really fascinating because it you learn how people process information and how they function, and it's oftentimes different than what we think is what is real, right? And so there's kind of this disconnect between what we think is happening in our own brains and what is actually happening in our own brains. And I always found that fascinating and kind of just developed that further. And I think that had me looking at the world slightly differently because it's how do I think the world views me? How do I view myself? And what is actually happening in my brain? And I think it just caused me to be a little bit more analytical about things that maybe other people aren't. And that's I think that's really helpful with storytelling, right? Because you're able to think about who am I talking to? How are they perceiving me? And what is the message that I want to get across to them? And
Yeah.
ultimately, that's storytelling is how do I convey this thing that's in my head to someone that's listening to me in a way that they can comprehend and resonate with and it sticks with them.
Who's your favorite storyteller?
Ah, I don't know if I have an answer to this, but I recently read Kindra Hall's Stories That Stick book, and I felt like she had one of the best books about storytelling that used storytelling.
Yeah.
And so that has stuck with me that she was able to create this book that was very in some places like very analytical, but still was able to take it and have the story elements pulled into the story. And I think that that's really important when you're teaching someone something or you're doing like I do a lot of workshops, and one of the things that I want with my workshops is that they're modeling what I'm teaching, right? So that I'm not just telling you, hey, you need to use less text or you need to show one idea at a time, but I'm actually showing you how you can do that. And I felt like she did a great job of kind of interweaving the technical aspects with the storytelling aspects.
So let me ask you this. Who's been kind of a hero or an inspiration for you in your life?
Wow. Hmm. I don't know. That's a very good question. I have no idea.
Let, let me ask you this then. If you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would
Hmm.
that be? Or who would you love to see give a speech? Who would be somebody that you would love to witness in person a speech?
So I read Creativity Inc. a few years ago by
Yeah.
the guy who started Pixar, and I really loved the way that he approached one the business, but also the idea of creativity in general and how the way he was able to kind of like marry things together in the book was really it really resonated with me in terms of I just remember there's this one section where he talks about when you're making a movie and you're getting ready for the movie to be released, you have all these different components, all these different departments. So you have the marketing department, you have the finance department, you have the art department, and all of them have a different motive, right? Like they all have something that they want. And if any one department wins, everybody loses. And so it's about this like combination of all these forces coming together. And I felt like that was a different way of viewing something, and I just really enjoyed the book, and I would love to see him talk. I feel like he has taken kind of this very technical aspect of computer programming and turned it into this beautiful storytelling aspect that becomes Pixar movies, and I think he would be a great person to hear
Yeah.
speak.
Those big organisms are fascinating how they work, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, as a designer, as an artist, what was the first thing that you made that you got a really good reaction? You were like, wow, this is something that makes sense. I can do this.
So in art, one of the things that I loved was taking these kind of abstract concepts and turning them into something that was actually a physical representation of it, even if it was an abstract idea and an abstract representation. And I had done like some sculpture classes that I really liked, and things kind of resonated with me, things I felt like were good representations, but I feel like the first time with graphic design was I did a set of tea boxes in college. And it was right after I'd taken the sculpture class. So I started to think about things in more 3D. And when I was making the tea boxes, we had to choose some unique aspect of the tea boxes. So we had chosen, because we in groups we had to kind of decide what the tea box company was, and then we individually created the boxes. So our company was you could learn a language by drinking tea. And so each tea came with like a little tea tag that had a word on it that you could learn, and each country that sold tea was represented by the language that they spoke. So I was in the photography studio kind of like playing with like setting up these teas and trying to photograph them, and one of the tea bags had spilt. It had like broken open, and I thought about how you could take the individual tea components and turn them into something else. So then I ended up drawing with these tea leaves, like the country, I drew like maps out, and I drew like nulls out for the tea, and ended up creating this kind of 2D dimensional aspect of a 3D object, and then turned it back into a 3D object through the tea boxes. And by doing that, you have to think about like all six sides and how they work together. And it's not just this flat poster that you're making, but it's instead this object that can be held in multiple ways, and how do people hold it. And so it's about thinking about something like further than just I'm trying to create a message and show it, but also how to create this, for lack of a better word, experience that someone
Mhm.
is having when they're looking and shopping. And it was the first time I feel like I won an award for it, and it was like very exciting, but
Nice.
also it's the first time I felt really proud of something that I'd done in graphic design, because before that I felt like it was I was just kind of like trying and not really hitting the mark, and that was the first time I felt like things kind of like aligned together.
That's wonderful. So, what is your motivation every day to do the work that you do? Not only the work that you do, but to help people and help yourself tell the story and evolve as a human. What is that for you?
I just love learning.
Yeah.
So I constantly love learning. I'm constantly reading and kind of like piecing pieces together and adjusting the workshops that I do based off of new concepts I've learned. And then when I work with people on their presentations, I'm constantly learning like what they want to show. And every single presentation is different, right? So every single thing that I work on, there's no one size fits all. And I really like that about it. I think other people wish that it was easy to like put into a cookie cutter box, because then they could just like solve the problem and be like, okay, here's step one, two, three, I'm done. But when you do something like that, when you're presenting something, or with graphic design, when you're showing something, you can't constantly do the same thing over and over again, because it's not going to fit for the problem. It's not going to fit for the audience. It's not going to fit for the client. And so it's about like being able to reinvent this similar problem in a new way and find a new solution.
So, of all of the clients that you've had, what's one of your favorite client success stories?
Um, I have worked with a lot of oral proposal teams. So basically, they are typically nonprofits that are working. They're pitching. They're basically pitching for funding from USAID, right? And so with that, they're typically working on something that is helping some aspect of another country. So whether they're cleaning up rivers, or educating children, or building toilets in other countries that are compostable, or whatever that happens to look like, right? And
Yeah.
so they're pitching for funding to be able to do this. And oftentimes it's super chaotic because the timelines are very, very truncated. You typically have like a week or two to put together this presentation that determines millions of dollars of funding. And there's a lot of subject matter experts. Everyone has a different opinion. And it's just a really tricky problem to solve, because you're trying to, one, differentiate yourself to say, like, I'm the best person to win this funding. But also, two, you're trying to convey a message to USA to say, like, why you care about this project. And when they come together, and when they actually, you're able to both communicate the story that resonates with the review board, but also you're able to like help this team kind of wrap their head around what they actually do, because a lot of times they're so stuck in like the technical details of what they do. And that's fair, because day to day that's what they do, right? But taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture and saying, like, oh, I'm actually helping these rural children be able to have education in a way that is sustainable, that they don't have to travel, 3 hours to get to the school, but that we can bring the school to them or whatever that happens to look like. And working with them and seeing that everything kind of like aligns together and having them then win the funding and being able to do the project is always really rewarding.
So you have to give out good advice to your clients. What's the best advice that you've ever gotten?
I think we've all been in a situation where we kind of look back and wish we had done something differently. And I was talking to my sister at one point, and I don't even remember what it was, to be honest. But what stuck with me was she said, you made the best decision at the time with the information that you had. And that's good enough, right? And I think that that has stuck with me because we can always continue to look back and have hindsight advice and beat ourselves up over like what we should have done. But ultimately, it's about in the moment, what information do you have, and just making the best choice you can and being okay with that's the choice that you made in the moment.
So, of all of the things that you've done and achieved in your life, what are you the proudest of?
I, huh. So I teach, and I will say when I have students that have come back after they have graduated or gone on and done whatever they're doing, and to actually hear that they have succeeded, I think that that probably is the most rewarding aspect because
Yeah.
day by day you're just doing the grading, you're teaching the lessons, you're not really thinking about, I mean, I understand that they're real people who are going to go into the world and do whatever they do, but it doesn't feel like you're doing that much in the moment because it's just day by day you're doing the same thing over and over again. But then, like one of my students recently, I found out that he has started his own business and it's really successful, and that he's able to take like the concepts that he learned, not just in my classroom, but like all the classrooms that he took and apply it, and that you had one small part of that journey, and that's really rewarding.
Absolutely. So, what's your favorite book? As a storyteller, what's your favorite book?
That is an impossible question.
Right. I figured I'd give it a shot.
um, right now, I would say it's 4,000 Weeks,
Okay.
which is a book, the most positive book that you could possibly read on mortality. And I have probably recommended it to about 10,000 people because it's amazing. He talks about how it's basically like looking at your life and making a choice about what matters, but he also does it in the most like positive, uplifting way. And he's a great storyteller. The way he talks or the way he writes is very, it resonates with you. And then if you listen to the audiobook, he's a great storyteller in the way that he reads it. And so I highly recommend that.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. I'll look into it. So, if everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, but you run the show, what's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think that I am constantly just trying to get what I can get done in a day and never succeeding. Which I think is probably due to me being having a never ending to do list and not being selective enough on what is on it.
Yeah.
um, I think that I do second guess myself a lot in terms of whether I think that what I'm doing is the right thing, whether that's, and so I think that's why the advice from my sister like really stuck because it's, well, if at the moment that you think that's the right thing, that's what you got, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
have the future knowledge that you're going to have. And I think that I am a hustler because I don't think the business would have succeeded otherwise, right? Like I think that that is something that you need grit and you need to be able to keep trying even when it seems like it's going to fail, and
Yeah.
being able to pivot, right? Like being able to say like this doesn't seem like it's working, let me try something else while maybe still trying this path to see if I haven't tried it long enough, and like being able to kind of like analytically look at things.
So if anyone out there wants to hire you, learn more about you, reach out, any of the good business, how can they do that?
Yeah, I have a website. It's makeitmemorable.studio, and I'm on LinkedIn and post content pretty regularly. And I have a newsletter where I send out like once a month-ish with tips and tricks on design and presentations and anything else that I find fascinating that month. So typically it's like once a year I'll send out like, here's the best books that I read this year, which is typically a list of like 10 books because
Yeah.
I've read like 40 books that year and it's very hard to choose.
Yeah. Excellent. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. Best of luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.